Okay, so I'm gonna be trying something new today. Um, I'm trying to start a new interview series, and my first guest that I'm gonna be trying to have on here is gonna be the Myopic Times. So I'm gonna jump into his Discord, and we'll get started whenever he's ready to let me get started. Hey there,
Hello.
what's going on?
Oh, nothing much. I was just working on an article.
Okay. Um, So what's the article that you're working on?
It's one. It's about healthcare, and why it should be. We should have universal because like it's cheaper and people don't have to pay as much for it.
Okay, cool, cool. Yeah. So for anybody who doesn't know you, this is the Myopic Times. He writes. He has his own website where he does like editorial articles, and I assume that's probably for what you're working on now. Something for that.
Yep.
Okay. Is there anything else you want people to know about you, like to introduce yourself?
Well, I guess if I were going to introduce myself, I'd just introduce myself as I'm a writer. I'm a social democrat, and that's pretty much an introduction right there.
Okay. So what brings you to Twitch?
Well, I was participating in some of the panels, and I really like the overall politics space because I really love arguing with people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I talked with you a little bit about what you were intending to do with your stream, and it sounds like you want to do a little bit of arguing with people. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. There's nothing I love more than debating somebody and just depending on what I'm debating about, either making them look bad or learning something new.
Okay, cool, cool. Um, so some of the stuff that people might want to fight with you about. Let's see. You said you're a social democrat, and then I know from other conversations I've had with you that you have a big interest in drug policy. Um, do you have any other like particular topics that you really want to lay out there so people can come at you?
I'd say mainly just like pretty much all avenues of social spending. I think we need to invest more in poorer communities to help change the vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle.
Okay, so do you take like a particular interest in poor communities? Is that a big part of your ethos?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think the major issue with poor communities is the fact that we aren't investing enough capital in them, and therefore we are losing out on predictive productivity we could already have. So essentially, if you have somebody just sitting around unemployed doing nothing all day, when they could be in a factory or in some other type of gainful employment that actually adds to the economy, you're just wasting money there. Just invest in those communities, and we can double our investment.
Okay, I've got revered simp in my chat. He says you look like if CTV had a real job. That's what he said. Um, okay, so the case you're kind of presenting is that it's not just good for the poor communities. It's good for everybody to increasing productivity, something like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It helps build up our GDP. It helps build up the overall wealth of everybody in the nation. It keeps us healthy. It keeps us strong, and it helps us stay on top of the geopolitical landscape.
Okay, so usually when people talk about investing in poor communities, I guess there's two pretty common angles that I hear people come at, and one of them is the one that you did, and the other one is people talking about how it's kind of a moral obligation that we should have toward poorer people in our country. I don't know. Do you have any reaction to that one?
Well, I would say that on a base level, I would say it's kind of a moral compulsion. But I think when you're like arguing with people who are against that kind of thing, it's more important to stick on the economic factors and that way, because it's a lot harder to convince somebody on a moral level rather than a pragmatic level.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because morals are just something way more foundational than the policy prescriptions that enhance somebody's life. Because morals they generally either come from just emotional values that were instilled in you as a child, or they come from a book like the Bible or any other type of objective framework. So people's morality is kind of not necessarily set in stone, but a lot less malleable than like, hey, look at this data. This data says this will achieve the outcomes that you probably want anyway.
Hmm. Um, I think it's probably true that people's views on morality are less malleable than their views on policy outcomes. However, I think there might actually be less disagreement among the people on their moral outlook towards obligations, or their moral outlook about obligations that we might have towards the poor, right? Because I think even a lot of conservatives who really aren't into the whole social spending thing, even the kind of people who might say, the bootstraps type of comments, um, still might have some kind of like religious ethic about taking care of poor people. Like they just want to do it through charity rather than through policy, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the difference there would be that that comes from more of an individual sense of responsibility rather than one that should be shared collectively. Because especially when you're talking about like Christians,
Hmm.
one of their main driving factors is helping the poor. If you look at like Jesus's teachings, so essentially they think that everything's up to free will and that individuals are the ones responsible for helping people out rather than having a government do that because somebody working on behalf of God is doing something virtuous, whereas a government integrating God, that's not so good.
Okay. Do you have any religious views that influence your outlook on this stuff?
No, I wouldn't say I have any religious views. No.
No. Okay. Um, so let's see. You mentioned the thing about personal responsibility, and one thing you often hear from conservatives is that they not only want people to have personal responsibility in the sense of giving to charity, but they also a lot of times they'll apply the personal responsibility to the poor people themselves, and they'll say like it should be their job to lift themselves up out of their circumstances, like regardless of how they got there, it shouldn't be incumbent on the rest of us to pull them back up. So I don't know what's your reaction to that stuff.
Well, I think if you talk to these people, you can get them to agree on at least a certain level that the circumstances people are born into affect their outcomes. Because one of the arguments I make often, and this is going to sound a little spicy, but I call it the reverse 1350. So basically, you can get people to agree with you that somebody who was poor is more likely than not to not go to college. And essentially, you're also able to get them to agree that people who go to college are going to make more and therefore provide more stable housing. And then you can run that through and eventually get a person to agree with that.
I'm guessing you call it the reverse 1350 just because you're just trying to apply the same concept of like using statistics to appeal to their preferred outcomes. Is that the idea?
Well, generally, it's an argument I made, although I'm sure somebody else made it before me. But if you look at the actual statistics on violent crime, like when people bring up the 1350, like that all aligns with leftist views of how class affects people and how any kind of sociology. If you look at it, it shows how poverty affects people, and you can essentially say that this aligns perfectly with what I would expect if I were to put a bunch of people in poverty and to break down their opportunities to gain a better life or a better footing for them or their children. So it all aligns with everything left wing people in general are trying to push for and trying to well the foundational beliefs of left wing thought essentially.
Okay. One thing you mentioned earlier was that investing in a lot of these communities will result in larger numbers of people going to college. It seems like there's a little bit of an anti-college zeitgeist happening over the last several years, or maybe like a backlash against the idea that more people should be going to college. I don't know. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that occurs mainly on the right, but I'm definitely seeing like on the left, people advocating against it because of the student debt. They're saying like we're all trapped in student debt, and going to college it's just a big scam because no companies actually hire off that. But I don't find that argument to be convincing at all because mainly because in this day and age, you pretty much need a college degree, literally of any kind, to get a well-paying job. Like I remember, I used to work at a factory, and at that factory, the only people who could become supervisors with people were people with a college degree, and it did not matter what degree you had. I knew one supervisor who was a marine biologist,
Oh,
and
that's a funny policy to have. That like that you just have to have a degree, but it doesn't matter what degree you have. What do you think is the rationale for that?
I think the rationale for that is somebody who was accepted into a college and finished with passing grades is more likely to be capable of taking on the responsibilities of higher management.
I guess they've just kind of proven that they're willing to accept a certain level of responsibility and like stick to long-term tasks and that kind of thing, I guess is the idea.
Well, I would say that's the idea they're working with. Although personally, I'd like to see a lot more of these places actually, hire off the floor for their managerial positions. But apparently, they don't do that anymore.
Okay.
And
Uh,
then
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say on the right wing, I've definitely seen an anti-education bias because they obviously we've seen it with like the K through 12 where people are showing up to school boards yelling about CRT, and we're getting books banned on the Holocaust. So obviously, they think at a certain degree that kids going into public school even is an indoctrination facility, and they see that to a higher degree with higher learning. Especially because if you were around on the internet during like 2015, 2016, the amount of anti-feminist stuff where you had a bunch of people in college yelling about stuff, that stuff got massively boosted in the algorithm. So a lot of people saw that, and I think that sowed at least some of the seeds for distrust in higher education.
Yeah, I've definitely seen more recently the stuff about elementary school kid all this concern about like, oh no, they're going to teach our elementary school kids to all become transgender or so, this kind of stuff. But the kind of conservative cultural I don't know what the word to use though, whatever their concern is about higher education, I've seen that going back several decades, like even 30, 40 years ago, they were all worried that it's like we're going to send our kids off to college and they're going to come back and be atheist feminists or something like that, something that's like antithetical to the way that they were raised. Um, and I think it's hard to kind of look at the way that college works and not admit that there is a grain of truth to that, right? If you go off to college, you're pretty likely to have it challenge some of the values that you grew up with and come back, being a little bit culturally different from when you left.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that's similar to a kind of a vicious circle I was talking about earlier, where not only is education more often to uh, because if you look at the statistics, more educated people are more likely to be Democrats. So that means that we have Republicans pushing up against their own people going into higher education, whereas Democrats are more likely to make sure their children get into higher education. So the issue there becomes that not only are less people becoming educated due to their political backgrounds, but there's also the issue of we're having more left wing people in there. So that essentially creates like a cycle where people are citing the research of people with more left wing biases constantly without having anything to battle against that.
Yeah, and that's been true for a long time, but it seems like it's been increasingly true, like especially in since the Trump era, there's been a growing gap with more educated people voting Democratic and less educated people voting Republican.
Yeah, in the words of Trump, I love the poorly educated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's hard to hear that and not think like, well, there's some fairly obvious reasons why he might say a thing like that. But no, okay, given that all of this stuff is kind of true, that the all of these ideas that higher education it kind of indoctrinates people into certain ideologies and stuff. It's not like completely fabricated out of thin air, right? Like since there is a grain of truth to that. I don't know. What would you have to say to conservatives who are worried that that kind of undermines their the values that they try to instill in their families?
Well, I'd probably say that that rather than just look at like how it can indoctrinate some people, rather than looking at it that way, look at it as a way for your child to gain an advantage in the workplace and also learn critical thinking skills that will allow them to look at information more critically and basically increase their likelihood of having a successful life.
Hmm. Um,
Plus the fact that if you have more Republicans going to these schools, they're less likely to have that same indoctrinating effect, even if they still have an increased likelihood of turning people out left wing. If you have actual right wing people in there to battle with the ideas from the left wing populace, then you actually have a more tempered and more reasonable academic scholarship.
that's true. It might actually go both ways. Like if the university might influence your kid to the left, but your kid might influence the university to the right. Um, So the thing that you were saying about education improving people's job prospects, it seems like whenever I hear that discussed now, usually the talk turns to like, yeah, maybe that's true in STEM fields, but it seems like a lot less true outside of like science, technology, engineering, math type of fields. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I'd say I'd say that's pretty much true. STEM fields, although we do need a lot more STEM majors because we've been outsourcing for STEM majors because our industries have been absolutely hurting for workers. And then on the other end, I think it's important to have a certain degree of the population educated in those lesser degrees because we still need those people and we need people to be highly educated. Otherwise, we have a having a less educated voting base is one of the key ways to turn a place authoritarian, I think.
Hmm. I've got to wonder also, like, if we have a society that can really only find a place to employ people who are educated in STEM fields, then it's like, what does that say about the values of our society? Like that we don't place monetary value on these other fields of knowledge that aren't useful in making an iPhone or something.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think we need to invest more in, getting jobs out there for the humanities because I think there are plenty of opportunities for that kind of thing.
Hmm. Um, so you're a writer. I mean, do you feel kind of like personally invested in that as a concept, like having um our society like put more value on writers or other people in the humanities?
Uh, hmm, that's it's a tough question there. Yeah, I think we should probably have. I think I would kind of have a personal stake in having a little more, societal appreciation for writers because one of the major issues is that people aren't looking at like who the writer is, what they've done previously, or even like the body of the work they're doing. They're just looking at the headline and sharing that kind of thing. So people have really dropped it. Well, I don't have any research on this, but I think people have dropped the amount of reading they actually do when it comes to important issues like politics or social issues or any of those other kinds of things.
To me, it doesn't seem like they're actually doing less reading necessarily. It just seems like they are kind of skimming the surface of lots of different things rather than going deep into a few sources. Because I would have imagined like 50 years ago, somebody's just reading their local newspaper and actually, I mean, somebody who's actually invested in politics. Of course, I'm sure there were people back then who just didn't read about politics at all. But for somebody who was really invested in politics, maybe they've got their local newspaper, maybe they've got a magazine or two that they like to read, and then they would go into probably a lot of depth reading, those couple of sources that they care about. But today we have such an overabundance of information at our disposal that it just seems like people will, skim the surface of this one and then just move on to the next thing.
Uh, yeah, I would disagree that they're even skimming the surface. I think people are just scrolling through headlines, and when they see one that pisses them off, they press the share button.
I'm sure that's true. Uh, so I don't know. Does that influence the way that you write headlines?
I try not to have too many emotionally charged words in my headlines, but you kind of have to get people to click on them.
Yeah, it seems like all the incentives are just pointing toward just grabbing attention as much as possible.
Yeah, let me read off a couple of my headlines. All the bad things, CRT and other thought-terminating cliches, the internet's romanticization of mental illness, gas, 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 prices soar, who's to blame, the Biden Burisma scandal, a complete timeline. So yeah, I guess I don't really use emotionally charged language.
You allude to a couple of controversial topics, though.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I went into if you're talking specifically about the CRT one.
That is the first one that came to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, so essentially, I just go basically on that one. I go over like what is CRT, is it being taught in schools, that kind of thing. So the
Hmm.
headlines I use they relate directly to the content of the article, and I don't think they belie any like what's the word like the opposite of what's actually in the article, misleading or deceiving. That's the word I was looking for.
Hmm. Um, what do you think is the percent of people who actually read one of your articles as opposed to people who just look at the headline? Do you have any idea? Like,
Hold on a second. I actually have a plug-in for this.
oh, nice. I I read a couple of your articles today, so maybe I'm throwing off the statistics.
Well, it's taking a little while to load, but usually it's like they're on for about 8 seconds.
8 seconds. Okay. Um, that's like the average or.
Yeah, that's the average. Sometimes people actually read the articles, but most of the time people just jump straight off.
Huh. Um, do you think there's anything we can do about that to get people to engage more deeply with the sources that they read?
I think people need to be more educated because one of the things we don't teach in our schools is we call them critical thinking skills, but really it's just philosophy.
Hmm.
So basically, like, how do you form your opinions? How do you know who to trust? Those kinds of things. We don't really teach those in our schools, other than for like, oh, you got to prepare for this. The standardized test coming up. You gotta be able to write something about that. That's pretty much the extent of how we teach our critical thinking skills, rather than actually focusing on putting out well-rounded people who are capable of engaging critically with the news sources that they may engage with.
So do you think if people are better informed on how to engage critically with those news sources, do you think they're then more likely to devote more time and attention to actually reading them and not just skimming the headlines?
Yeah, I think if people are taught, to at least recognize the biases they may have, they'll be more capable of recognizing emotionally charged language and be more interested in, is this headline, are they actually saying what's true? Or are they just posing a question that they're going to say, no, that's not happening to in the article? So people will be more willing to actually delve deeply into it because they're more intellectually curious about what's actually occurring rather than just looking at it, assuming it's true, and then getting pissed off or getting real excited about it, like, oh, weed's getting legalized. when really somebody's just putting up a bill and it's not going to pass.
That makes a lot of sense, but I think it's still like it's a hard battle to fight though, right? Because the entire media industry is kind of built around like farming clicks. It's it's kind of just all they make their money off just grabbing your attention, and as soon as you're reading one thing, now there's already more media sources already trying to grab your attention away from the first one. So it's just um and obviously they're well practiced and kind of sophisticated about how to do that. And so it seems like a difficult battle against some pretty firmly entrenched facets of human nature, to just try to get people to exercise enough patience to actually read an entire article.
Yeah, I'd rather I'd place most of the blame on the consumer rather than the publisher because I think whether or not people actually sit down and read or whether they're just clicking through, I don't think the advertisers really care about that. What they care about is the amount of people who click on the ads on the website. So essentially, if somebody is willing to sit down and read, they're going to see that little ad scrolling down as they scroll down, and they're far more likely to click on it. So rather, the media companies are just engaging in whatever drives the most people to get on that page and sit on there. And apparently, that's putting out headlines that are incredibly exaggerated or sometimes outright false, according to the article below it.
um do you promote your own website through ads on other websites?
No, I haven't engaged in that.
Okay, how do you do your outreach? How do you build your audience?
Oh, I mostly just whenever I write an article, I put it through on a couple of these discords down here, and then I also try to basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to uh, well, when I first started out, I wasn't doing this, but now I'm trying to advertise specifically to like conservatives. So I put in keywords that conservatives may search. So I'm aiming for higher search results on like DuckDuckGo and Bing, things conservatives are more likely to click on. And I'm putting conspiratorial. Uh, I'm writing about more conspiratorial things and then providing a heavily sourced article that actually goes through the claims that have been made about them. So that's what I'm aiming for on mine. That's how I do my outreach.
Oh, what has been the results of that so far? Like, have you talked to a lot of conservatives who read your website?
No, I did have somebody comment on one of my websites with a very long comment. I replied to the guy, but he never got back to me.
Okay. Um, how long have you been doing this for, writing your articles?
I'd say I've had the website for probably about 6 months.
Okay, okay. Do you have any like ambitions to do anything? I don't know. What do you see as the future of the website?
Well, I'd like to start making a decent amount of money off of it so I can invest more time into things like this, looking into topics and trying to spread at least what I believe is the correct take on them.
Hmm. And it's myopictimes.com, right?
Yep, myopictimes.com.
And so this is like editorial articles, and you said you're a SOCDEM, so I assume that that's going to mean it's typically like center left ish slant to most of the opinions you're presenting. Is that about right?
Yeah, it slants more center left. Although a lot of my pieces, I like to heavily source them, so they're a little more objective than just purely editorial. But I would say they're editorial in nature. Yeah.
Hmm. So if you're doing articles from like roughly a center left point of view, but you're trying to build a conservative audience, um, how do you specifically try to bridge that gap?
Well, essentially, on the articles that are targeted like directly at conservatives, I like. Did you read any of the Hunter Biden ones?
No, I didn't. I didn't read any of the Hunter Biden ones.
All right, so those are pretty much the most targeted to conservatives. It's essentially trying to get them to click on it, and then I'm not providing any like color commentary. I'm just writing down the results of my research directly into it. So essentially, I try to keep off like words like I or we or our, these personal pronouns, and rather just provide a rundown of what happened, who said what. Here's a source. So essentially, in like my Hunter Biden ones, I probably have like 20 or 30 sources per article on those ones. So it's more so from a fact based nature. And I think if a conservative clicks on that and they actually read through it and they see that I have sources that say what I'm saying, I think they are at least more willing to come to a more moderate stance on what they had originally believed.
Okay. I I, th- I think with a lot of conspiracy theorist type people, it seems like a big part of their problem is media literacy, right? Like they seem to have some colorful opinions about, let's just say, about which sources of information they can trust and which ones they can't, right? So it seems like there's a lot of confirmation bias that goes into this. Like they've got whatever source it is that's feeding them these conspiracy theories in the first place, and they're likely to listen to those and then just disregard people that are trying to debunk their point of view. And yeah, I mean, of course, you're going to be familiar with the whole concept of like people staying in their kind of information bubbles or whatever, and not having trouble accessing anything from outside their usual media sphere or whatever, right? Um, so given all of that, um, I I wonder like even if a conservative comes across like a really well sourced article that's just saying like here's what happened with Hunter Biden. Here's 20 other sources corroborating this version of events. Um, well, I guess I was about to say I wonder if that'll even be enough, but I suppose there's going to be a spectrum, right, of conservatives, like how far gone they are, and then for many of them it won't be enough, and hopefully for some of them it will. I don't know. What do you have to say about any of that?
Well, I think anytime you're talking to a conspiracy theorist, it's not about convincing them in one conversation. It's about convincing them over the long run, putting cracks in the facade. That's what it's about when you're talking to people who have like an entirely different concept of reality. You can't just take them and throw them into reality and go, there it is, look at it. They'll just call you a liar or try to ignore you. So
Mm-hmm.
essentially, what you have to do is you just have to try to bring the information to them rather than just scream in their face, hey, look, you're stupid, you're wrong. If you say that stuff, then they're going to dismiss you out of hand. So you have to come to them and just give them the opportunity to look at it and come to a conclusion themselves rather than try to spoon feed it.
Um, do you have any friends or family who you think would fall into the camp of your target audience or that are conspiracy theorists, the kind of people that you're trying to reach out to?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So,
Uh,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I got one person in my family who is pretty heavily into conspiracy theories, like the website BitChute.
I've heard of it. I'm not really familiar with it.
All right, so basically, what I call it is YouTube for Nazis,
Okay.
and so yeah, he's a very heavy viewer of that. And then I also have I think my father would probably fall under that too because he was kind of hey, I'll touch off that subject.
Okay. Um, so do you think, well, I don't know. What is your experience like talking to, like for example, your friend who's really into the Nazi videos or whatever it is that he likes to watch? Like what is your experience like of trying to talk to him about that?
Well, essentially, the main thing I would do when talking to someone like that is like just let them make their claims, and then in the background start googling what they're saying. So I had one friend who believed in the whole QAnon thing and was like, a million children go missing in the United States every day, and they thought a million children were being child trafficked in the United States every day. This person literally told me that the United States had the most child trafficking out of any other country. So I would look that number up, and what they're seeing is the number of children who go missing every year. But what they're not looking at is the fact that most children are found within 24 hours, and they weren't really missing. They were just out and about and didn't connect with their parents.
So that's like the number of reported, or like the parents made some kind
Yeah,
of legal report that the kid was missing and then just found him 4 hours later or something.
yeah, because something a lot of people think, but is incredibly wrong, is you don't have to wait 24 hours to report somebody missing.
Okay. Have you had any success debunking those kind of things?
Yeah, I remember one time somebody told me that all of the people in the Federal Reserve were Jewish. And then I looked into it. I looked at all their Wikipedia pages. There may have been one person who was Jewish, but literally everybody else was like Christian or Catholic or Baptist. And I got him to at least admit that part. And then I also got him to because at one point he said to me that I'm trying to think here. That Russia did not have like a Federal Reserve system. They didn't have a federal banking system, and he said that the United States was one of the only countries that had a federal banking system.
Hmm.
And then I just looked that up and showed it to him, and he shut up real quick. Although I don't know if 'cause it's really hard to get people to throw away beliefs like that. So often, after talking to them, after showing them the right source, that like a week later they'll still be saying the same stuff.
Hmm. So do you, okay, that's really interesting. Like if you can get somebody to admit that they're wrong about something and then they still go back to saying it a week later, do you think like something happened within that week that where they like encountered a counter argument to what you were saying, or do you think they just forgot, or what do you think's going on?
I'm pretty sure they just held that belief a lot more strongly. So like a week later, they forgot about what I said to them, or they went down. They started watching YouTube videos that were getting recommended to them on the algorithm again, and then they just became engrossed in a bunch of other political stuff. So they just went back to their old default arguments. But I think if you debunk something enough to the same person, they'll stop saying it eventually.
Hmm. Okay. Um. I know when people are in like a cult or something, it like you in order to get them to give up the belief system, you pretty much have to get them away from the social network that's reinforcing it. They have to be removed from the environment, removed from that context or whatever. I wonder if like the same thing might apply to conspiracy theorists. Like if we could somehow get your friend to just stop watching Nazi videos all day, like if that's the piece of environmental context that's propping up his that's getting him to keep going back to these same beliefs over and over again. I wonder if do you think that that has anything to do with like how we could effectively combat conspiracy theories?
That is absolutely a major component of how these things usually work. Like when you're talking about like extremist groups,
Hmm.
I don't know. Let me think. Like I'm trying to think of like a Nazi group. Let's just say we have a Nazi group.
Hmm.
And so essentially, how these people operate is they take in somebody who's vulnerable, somebody who's looking for some kind of guide, somebody who feels like they aren't really stacking up to the average. And they take that person in and they say, and they're very welcoming and they try to basically ingratiate them with that community. And then eventually they get them to start saying stuff that alienates them from other communities, and then they just get further and further into that, And one of the major issues I have with a lot of the left leaning communities online is the fact that they look at these people like terrible human beings who will never, ever be redeemed. And that actually reinforces what these extremist groups are trying to do, because they're explicitly trying to get people to outwardly express themselves as somebody who can't be redeemed. Like when people get Nazi tattoos on their face or something, like this person is going to be socially ostracized by a lot of people, and they're probably going to, I wouldn't doubt that they would get a lot of hatred and vitriol from, and this is deserved, right? From like minority people they encounter, even if they gotten rid of that belief, they would still probably get that from people, and so that would be a way for them to drift back into that same community.
Hmm. Um, yeah, I suppose if the narrative of that group is that the outside world is all evil and corrupt, and we're the ones that have the right answers, and none of them are going to accept you, then when you go out to the outside world and you find that indeed they are very unwelcoming and unforgiving of your differences, that it makes a lot of sense that that would feed into their narrative and make them more deeply entrenched in their group. Um, Do you think there is any like left wing equivalent of that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have seen many places that are in like incredibly vitriolic towards people with opposing viewpoints or people they see as, you don't even really have to bring in opposing viewpoints to a lot of these places. You just have to act in a way that they don't like or they aren't used to, and they'll try to ostracize you. I'm not going to name any names, but I was in one Discord at one point where I argued with a person, and then a moderator eventually showed up and said that well, actually, it was a different community member who I was not arguing with, who showed up and tagged a moderator and said that I was going around gaslighting people. And then a moderator came in and said, I take claims of gaslighting very seriously. And so he got the story from the other guy, and then I talked to this fella, and essentially what I got from that fella was that he didn't feel safe being around me, and that I was gaslighting people by disagreeing with them. And so that's a server that I left because if anybody doesn't feel safe, it's probably the person being called like one of the worst things a human being can do. Because
Hmm.
I don't generally go around gaslighting people unless they've done something seriously wrong.
So a community like that, if I try to compare them to like QAnoners, I can see some parallels. Like obviously they're very insular and kind of paranoid about the outside world, but I think in other ways it seems very different. I mean, obviously the way they talk about these things is very different. They've got their own kind of left wing cultural flavor to it. But do you think there's any difference in terms of how you need to approach them? Like the like maybe just the fact that they have different language and different values and this kind of stuff. Like, do you speak differently to them if you're trying to reach out to them?
No, I'd say it really doesn't matter what kind of ideology they come from. Uh, you need to speak softly, and you need to have a warm, embracing attitude when you're dealing with people, because you don't want to scare them off. You don't want to become the out group. You don't want to become the person that they've been told about. You want to be somebody who is different from the straw man that their group has created. Because if you become that straw man, you're just reinforcing the attitudes that community has already fostered.
Hmm. I think I would agree that that's true with a lot of groups, but I think there might be some exceptions to that because I think there are some groups where their internal idea is that our group is the strong people and the outside of the world are all like weak and they're not upholding the right values. So I guess what I'm thinking of is for example, there might be like Nazi groups that just think a lot of their ethos is to be like projecting strength and dominance or something like that, and then they kind of view the outside world as being like lowly and degenerate, or something like that. So in with somebody like that, I wonder if by being kind to them, you might even be kind of playing into their narrative in a way. It's like these people are afraid to confront us or something like that.
I wouldn't say because when you say afraid to confront someone, that's not necessarily what I mean by being kind. What I mean
Mm,
by being kind is just, it's okay to argue with people. It's okay to show them different sources of information. But you need to be engaging in conversation with, at least if you're coming to somebody who's in good faith, like actually trying to have like a reasoned disagreement with you. Then it's very important to be kind to that person. But if you have somebody from that group coming at you in bad faith, like the people who are basically the enforcers of the group that are designed to, I'm going to make this person show their true colors, because they have a lot of those in these kinds of groups. Where essentially they try to make you mad, they try to get you to say some really awful stuff. So I think in that kind of situation, there is a little more confrontation you can get. You can kind of back away from that kind tone and rather engage with them on the level they're engaging you with, but not take it like any step further than what they're doing.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Um, so you were making this distinction between the people that are interested in having like a reasonable discussion about a disagreement with you versus people that are approaching it in bad faith. Um, so I guess there's a lot of different questions I could ask about that. So for one, how do you tell the difference?
It's fairly easy, I think, to tell the difference because if you're engaging in like a long conversation with somebody, you can eventually tell the patterns by which they're making their claims or their counter arguments, and you can often see that they are reading what you write in a specific way and trying to make it out to be something entirely different. So essentially, let me think here. I had one experience where I was saying to somebody that I didn't like the fact that they were separating families at the border. And this person then started saying I was pro child abuse. And then eventually, after me trying to explain that I don't think it increases incidents of child abuse, this person then started calling me a pedophile and then went around to a bunch of different discords telling people I was a pedophile. So I think they generally show their ass pretty heavily like in the first conversation you have with them.
So with somebody like that, do you think that there's any way to do any kind of effective outreach to them, or do you think it's just not even worth talking to them at all?
I think the most effective form of outreach for that is to pull other people away from their community, and then as their community gets smaller and smaller, they might realize something that they may not have realized earlier. But on that specific topic, I haven't done any kind of research into that, so I'd just be guessing, coming straight out my ass.
Um, so about pulling people away from the community, I'm guessing that what you meant are the people who are interested in having some kind of reasonable disagreement with you, that those are the people that you're trying to pull away. Is that right?
Yeah, just the average person who just thinks they found the truth. They think they found the truth. They found a community that likes them, that agrees with them, that shows them things that either they show them examples of like the left doing something stupid and they get mad at it or they laugh at it, and they're communicating with these people heavily, and they're just the average person who needs and wants attention from other people, and this is the best way they've gotten that attention. But rather you can come into that community and you can start talking with these people and show them, hey, you can get this social attention from other people. You don't need to hang out with these guys. These guys are wrong. These guys are spreading like bad things. Right? They're not bad people, but they have bad ideas, and I think that's making it bad for you. That kind of thing.
Hmm. So there's going to be some people. I guess there's going to be like a spectrum to this, right? There's going to be some people who are pretty willing to listen to you and engage with you honestly. There's going to be some people who just want to fight with you for being an outsider. What do you think? How about the people that are in the middle, right? Because I think there are some people who could go either way. And what do you think we can do to facilitate those people leaning to one side rather than the other?
Leaning to one side of like the bad faith to the good faith. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Because there's some people who I think might be like sensitive to the exact situation or to the way that you approach them, and maybe they'll be willing to like honestly and critically engage you, and or maybe they'll be like really defensive with you, or maybe even a bunch of other reactions too. But yeah, like what do you think we can do with people like that? How would you talk to them? Or
So essentially, like a person that sometimes comes in good faith, but other times is just trying to troll people.
yeah.
I'd say generally you just probably shouldn't engage with them when it's pretty obvious they're trying to troll you.
Okay, so you just kind of wait until they're in the right mood to engage with them or something like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like a dog. If I give you attention when you do something bad, you'll keep doing the bad stuff. If I give you attention when you do something good, you'll keep doing the good stuff.
Okay. Um. So your friend who you've talked about with this a lot, is this a person who's generally like pretty good faith with you as far as you've defined it, or do you think he's in the middle, or where do you think he's?
Yeah, I'd say he's good faith. He believes a lot of I don't want to say crazy, uh, but yeah, he believes a lot of those kinds of things, and he truly believes them. So I'd rather talk with somebody who truly believes something completely out there than talk about something with somebody who doesn't believe what they're saying.
Um. And how do you think this person got to where they're at in the first place? Is it just like a media pipeline or some kind of like social group reinforcement, or how do you think this came to be the case?
It's probably a combination of several factors. Like social media definitely plays a role, but I think there's probably an aspect of upbringing that brings you closer to those types of things. Like I live in a very conservative place, so all of the people I know are conservative, except for my grandma. So I think they're a lot closer to that kind of pipeline. Whereas, like in a more left-leaning community, you might be worried about like the left-wing pipeline. But I think it all goes down the same rabbit hole of like social media, because social media companies thrive on basically getting people addicted to the dopamine hit when they see something they're either mad about or it's generally just angry. That's generally how they do their algorithm.
So if you're talking with conservative people in your community, do you make any purposeful effort to appeal to their conservative values when you're trying to talk to them about their conspiracy beliefs or anything like that?
When talking about, yeah, I think hmm, that's a tough question there. I don't think you can appeal to like conservative values when you're talking about like debunking conspiracies, because one of the biggest conservative values is like hating the government, and usually the conspiracies are about the government.
Hmm. Um, so yeah, I think that's not the only thing they believe in, though, right? Like, I mean, they might also believe in like I don't know, tradition and trust and authority and like I don't know, kindness and charity and like I don't know, these kind of more traditional things that we would associate with Christianity, basically. And I don't really know exactly how I would go about applying that to like um to a conspiracy thing, but well,
Well, actually,
maybe
now that you mentioned
honestly, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Now that you mentioned religion, I actually do remember my grandma was speaking with somebody who was looking at a church pastor who was essentially saying that God had came to him in a dream and said that the apocalypse was coming soon. So I actually looked into the Bible for quotes that might rebut what this person was saying, and so essentially I used their faith and their belief in the Bible to essentially debunk it by one of the main things was that this pastor had said, "Now I'm not entirely sure that God was speaking to him." And if you actually look into the Bible, it says that a prophet will know if God spoke to him. You will never be playing a guessing game. If somebody is saying that God spoke to them, they might be telling the truth. But if somebody says God might have spoken to me, they're not telling the truth. God would have told you if he was speaking. So I use that as basically a jumping off point for an argument based on different religious verses in the Bible to basically help my grandmother deal with one of her friends that was, going down kind of a rabbit hole there.
How did that turn out?
I'm not entirely sure of the results, but I'm guessing they didn't turn out too well because she probably just stopped talking about that with my grandma.
Hmm. I wonder though, like you were saying earlier that that your goal with a lot of these people isn't necessarily to get them to turn, to do a 180 in a single conversation, but instead just to put little cracks of in their facade or to generate a little bit of doubt. And I wonder um, if you can tell whether that has happened or not, right? Because even somebody who on the surface appears to be not receptive to what you're saying to them might still be engaging with a little bit of internal doubt.
Yeah, I think the people that I speak the most with, like it probably takes over the course of like a year to get them like two dots closer to the left. But you will see a gradual change happening where they accept the foundational beliefs of the left wing. They won't outright accept the prescription of it, but when you have arguments, you won't have to start at like the base level every single time because there's a couple of layers that you basically built up where they'll say, "Yeah, I accept this thing, but I don't accept this third layer. You got to convince me on that third layer."
Does that ever work the other way around? Like, are they ever able to persuade you of what they believe?
It depends on if what they're, and this is going to sound kind of conceited, but it depends on whether what they're saying is true. Because I look up pretty much everything I hear anybody say, and I look up stuff I say very often, and then I will correct myself like 10 or 15 seconds later.
How about stuff that's like opinions rather than facts? Are you ever moved by their opinions?
I think when people say opinions, I really hate the word opinions because people have opinions on climate change, but climate change is a fact. So I'd have to have like a more specific like what exactly do we mean by opinions?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the most obvious example would just be like value judgment stuff. So it would be like this particular political candidate is good or bad, or something like that.
I don't think I necessarily talk about like specific politicians, rather just the underlying ideals. Although I have certainly spoken with a lot of people about Trump and Biden as well.
Hmm.
That comes with the territory of having a president in the White House.
Okay, so I mean, we could use Trump or Biden as an example. Like, do you think any of the people that you've talked to have managed to convince you of anything about Trump or Biden that you would have earlier been resistant to?
Uh, I don't think so. I think just like on factual stuff mainly, like what did this person say, what did this person do, is more of the kind of stuff I'm convinced of because I don't necessarily put stock into political candidates in and of themselves, but rather the platforms they run on and the likelihood of them actually doing what they say. Although I guess that part would be more of an opinion subjective base.
Hmm. You vote?
Oh yeah,
Okay. Yeah. I'm not trying to dox you or whatever, but do you live in like a swing state?
oh god, no, I live in Indiana.
Oh, okay, okay. Um, so your vote for the presidency is mostly moot, but I mean, I don't know how much you care about other things like local or state level elections.
Oh, I like voting on the judges because it always asks me should he retain his seat, and I always say no because they think they're better than me. They can't judge me.
Is I wonder if that's almost like I mean, it sounds like you're maybe joking about that a little bit, but do you maybe have like a belief in term limits or something like that? Like judges should only serve for a certain amount of time? Is that
Not necessarily. I just want the right guy in for the right job, and none of these guys are the right guy.
judges always seem like the most difficult thing for me to vote on. Like whenever I'm going through a ballot trying to research all this stuff, it's always so hard to find information about all the judges. But, it- do you have okay, we have in California where I live, kind of like referendums. Basically, we have ballot propositions where we just do like direct democracy to implement a new law. Do you have anything like that in Indiana?
I do not believe so. Although I will admit that I am not like entirely like read up on Indiana, ballot initiatives and such.
Okay, so it's pretty much all just representative stuff. You're pretty much just voting for candidates all the time.
As far as my knowledge goes, yes.
Um, what is your take on just democracy as a functioning system? Or are you well? I guess let's start with like, are you a big believer in democracy or no?
I don't necessarily care about the political system we run on. I more so care about the results, and generally, democracies are more stable than other kinds of governments. And democracies generally provide like the best outcomes rather than just having, maybe an authoritarian government in place that's constantly looking for new political enemies to persecute.
Okay, so you think democracies are less likely to find enemies? Is that that?
No, not necessarily. I think democracies just usually end up with having your representatives, uh, because, like in an authoritarian government, the government is often just busy with other things, like with things that aren't really of concern. Like if we look at, and I'm not necessarily going to call this an authoritarian government, but it was certainly an attempt. If you look at somebody like Trump, Trump was, instead of dealing with the COVID pandemic, he was rather looking for new political enemies to rally his base against. And I think that's a hallmark of uh, authoritarian nations and governments. They focus more on like finding the new outgroup to rally the citizens against, rather than actually improving the underlying situation. Whereas in a democracy or a representative democracy, the people in charge are beholden to the people. Essentially, they're like, at least in our nation, the job of the politician is to get voted back in. So they will do essentially whatever either the people want or whatever they think will result in better outcomes for the people, specifically for that purpose, rather than looking for outgroups to demonize it. And although that does occur on some level in the United States.
Yeah, there's this kind of weird irony with the kind of scapegoating that you're talking about that Trump would engage in, where on the one hand I can see why you'd say that would be characteristic of authoritarian governments, because of course we've seen them do that a lot. But on the other hand, if the reason they're doing it is to build popular support, it's kind of weird to say that that's so different from something that would happen in a representative democracy, because if the whole idea of the virtue of a representative democracy is that it's supposed to be more responsive to the opinions of the people, and then it turns out that the way to build the support of the people is by having an enemy outgroup, I wonder like why do you think that would be different in a representative democracy than it would in an authoritarian government?
Well, the main issue, I probably should have been more clear, but in authoritarian governments, it's more often that they find like an imagined enemy, like a straw man enemy. Whereas, like under Trump, if he had actually dealt with COVID in the beginning, like we wouldn't have Biden as a president. We just wouldn't. So he did what he thought would rally his base more, and it did rally his base more. The problem is there are a lot more people in the United States than his base. His base is actually a smaller sample of the voting base itself.
Hmm. It seems like historically, for the most part, democratic nations do seem to get along with each other pretty well, but I'm not really convinced that they get along better with other countries that are not also democracies, if that makes any sense, right? Like we could think back to the Cold War era, and you know the West was all democracies, but we had no shortage of enemies. It's just our enemies were all the other, you know, the countries on the other side of the world that were not democracies. And then, you know, more recently we've had this whole war on terror thing, right? So you know, our representative democracy had no trouble finding enemies and scapegoats when the time came for it.
Yeah, I think the difference would be when you're looking at authoritarian governments and authoritarian politicians, they're more likely to find those enemies domestically rather than oh God, what's the opposite of
Internationally?
yeah, internationally. Like I think in representational democracies, you're less often to find them focusing on domestic enemies and rather international enemies.
Um, hmm. I, I don't know. I mean, that sounds like it might be true, but again, it's like um, there's so many historical examples of representative democracies being very like stratified societies. And for example, I mean, in the United States, we used to literally have slaves here, and if that's not like a domestic, well, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of mixing up terms a little bit because you were talking about domestic enemies, right? And a slave isn't really somebody that you would think of as an enemy, but obviously, like if you think of them as like an in group out group dynamic, right? It's still like um yeah. I don't know. What do you think?
I think one of the major issues with that is that it, God, I really don't want to say this, but back then they considered them not people,
Hmm.
so they were essentially like regarded as chat.
Sure, and I think you could find other examples like with authoritarian groups finding their scapegoats, they would also treat those groups like they're not people too.
Yeah, I suppose you may be right. It's possible my opinion on this isn't fully developed.
Yeah, I'm really not sure either. I mean, I guess I'm trying to like challenge you a little bit, but I'm not sure I really have a strong opinion on whether you're right or wrong about this.
Yeah, I should definitely do some more research into this. I haven't really researched this. This is just kind of my own observation, so it's more so anecdotal and subjective at this time. So yeah, I should probably look into that more before going around saying that all the time.
So it sounds like is that's one of your biggest reasons for supporting the idea of representative democracy. Do you have other reasons that are important to you?
Uh, I think that would be the main one because I think they generally result in and better outcomes for the populace than in authoritarian governments because in authoritarian governments they will give you rights, but they'll only give you the rights that keep you from actually rebelling against the state.
Hmm.
Whereas in a representative democracy, the populace has the opportunity to push for those rights without having to overthrow the state.
And when you say better outcomes, are you defining the better outcomes mainly in terms of those rights, or what else counts as a better outcome?
The better outcomes, as in we have a more stable and long lasting system of governance. Uh, so we don't constantly have revolutions in democratic nations generally, whereas in authoritarian nations, there are well, not so much anymore, really. But in the 1900s to the early and mid 1900s, there were quite a few revolutions going on in more authoritarian dictatorship places.
I know even in monarchies that would just last hundreds or thousands of years, those are obviously very stable governments, but even then they would have difficulties with transitions of power. Like if their king died, then sometimes there would be a power struggle to replace them or something like that. Yeah. Where representative democracy, at least we have like a pretty orderly system of well, we're supposed to anyway have a pretty orderly system of deciding who gets to take power next. But obviously we've got some kind of wrenches thrown into the works of that lately.
I would say that I think January 6th, I think that's a very good example of how stable our institutions we had a bunch of people invade the Capitol, and with the president's support, whether implicitly or explicitly, that really depends on somebody's subjective viewpoint. But we had essentially the person with the most authority in the land trying to topple our democratic institutions, and they survived that.
hmm so do you think you're actually more confident in the stability of the system after January 6th than you were before it?
I would say I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think it really depends on the outcome of the next election, because I feel like if Trump can get back into power, he might have a better game plan to actually try to take down the system. But uh, at this point, I think it's a testament to our ability as a democratic nation to uphold, at the very least, our Constitution and the systems that have been built around.
Okay, so you have a bunch of beliefs about how representative democracy is likely to lead to better outcomes for most people, but you know if there are people trying to overthrow representative democracy, no, I can imagine maybe some of the people at the top could just be doing it for selfish reasons. They just want to seize power or whatever. But in order for that attempt to go anywhere, they have to have a sufficient number of people backing them from farther down in their movement. Like there have to be some true believers, right? People who honestly, well, I guess there's a couple different ways it could go. Well, like one, it could be people who, the people who believe that the election was stolen, right? Like the people who believe that what they were doing is actually trying to save democracy. But then likewise, there could be some people who are against democracy and actually want to see it overthrown. So I don't know. It seems like I guess it's mostly the former and not the latter. Do you think that's true?
More so the people who believe that the election was stolen.
Yeah. It seems like most of the people who would be in favor of what Trump did on January 6th are probably mostly people who believe the election was stolen from him, and they believe that they are supporting democracy rather than trying to overthrow it. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, I would say that that would be the majority of the people in the United States who would agree with the events of January 6th, whereas the paramilitary groups like the Proud Boys, the Three Percenters, and the Oath Keepers, I don't know if they actually believe that. I think they're just fascist groups that wanted to take over the United States and institute their own policies via the mouthpiece of Trump.
Uh-huh. So presumably like those people are probably going to think that their preferred system of government is going to be the one that has better outcomes, right? Like if somebody's a committed ideological fascist, right? Um,
Yeah, but I think the important thing to remember is that a lot of them will not have good outcomes because they've been charged with seditious conspiracy.
well, the people who directly participated in January 6th, yeah.
Well, actually, it would be specifically the paramilitary groups rather than just the people who believe the election was stolen, because those
Mhm.
would rather be just regular Americans who showed up to that rally and then were pointed in the direction. Whereas the paramilitary groups themselves had plans to do that, and they also had basically supply depots around Washington that they were unable to actually get access to because there was enough security, at least around Washington itself, to prevent those supplies from getting.
Um, so the people that are participating in those kind of movements, like in the paramilitary groups and so on, do you think that all of them are so far gone that we can't reach out to them and communicate with them in any kind of productive way, or do you think like what do you think are our prospects for de-radicalizing some of those people?
If we're talking about just the rank and file members, I'd say it would be difficult to de-radicalize them, but it's still definitely worth the time and effort. Whereas people like I don't know if they necessarily use these ranks, but like the leaders, the lieutenants, the generals, those people probably can't de-radicalize.
Do you think is that just a matter of them being too invested in their position within the group, or do you think it's are they just more entrenched in their beliefs, or what do you think is why would they be harder to reach?
I think they would absolutely be more entrenched in their beliefs, and rather than just entrenched in the surface level of beliefs, like the election was stolen, they're rather more interested in power and wiping out degeneracy.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
those people would have more hateful beliefs and more strongly held beliefs, and it would just be. I wouldn't say they're absolutely unreachable. I just don't think it would be worth like anyone's time trying to de-radicalize those ones.
Um, so if somebody's beliefs are just really motivated by hate, and if it isn't the case that that you can get through to them just by correcting misinformation or anything like that, um, do you think there's any prospect of getting through to them by some other means, obviously there's the I'm forgetting his name, Daryl something or other, the guy who goes and befriends KKK members and kind of gets them to leave the group. Or I mean, I don't know. Do you think there's any equivalent of that for like is it possible for more people to kind of follow his lead and kind of engage with extremist groups and just I don't know, befriend them or so, whatever it is that you've got to do to get through to them.
I think it would probably be good if that occurred. Although I think the better result would be to try to like slowly break up those groups so people have to mingle more with the general population. That would probably be a quicker and more efficient way of getting people de-radicalized. But I'm not sure because bringing up Daryl Davis is that's a pretty good counterexample to all the things I said earlier.
Maybe. Um, Let me see. So a lot of these extremist groups are going to be drawing on people who are very alienated to begin with. Like you were saying like about an hour ago. The way that people get into these groups in the first place is that they're unhappy with their station in life, and they feel like um, well, you know where what I'm saying about that, right? These new groups will kind of welcome them in socially and give them a feeling of community and a feeling of purpose and that kind of stuff. And it seems like in order to get them to leave those groups, you might have to replace those things, right? It seems like it's going to be very hard to persuade somebody to leave an extremist group without giving them a new feeling of community and purpose and whatever it is that they're getting from these movements in the first place.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. That's why that's one of the major reasons, at least one of the contributing reasons that I believe we need to start investing in like poorer communities because this is often where they recruit people, and I think that would extend to like all of America. We because with the fact that people aren't going to church anymore, they're not regularly going to a place where where they know people, where they have a buy-in to the community. We need to bring up different kinds of opportunities for these people to meet with other people. So like community centers, community gardens. Invest in these communities and just give them more opportunities to mingle with everybody around.
Yeah, it seems like an kind of an unfortunate fact of our culture that we've just become more and more isolated from one another, like especially physically isolated, right? Like as we're spending, like as great as it is that we have a lot of online social opportunities, it just seems like so many people are. staring at a screen all day and just spending very little, face to face time with other humans. And given that that's the case, it's no wonder that there's a lot of depressed, alienated people for these extremist groups to draw on.
Yeah, I would agree. Although I do feel personally attacked.
No, I mean I'm just as guilty of this as you are. I'm sitting in front of a screen all day too, but yeah, I think I'm past I'm 42 years old. I think I'm past the age where they're going to be trying to recruit me to be a Nazi. But because it seems like it's mostly young people that are I don't know that are more susceptible to being pulled into some new direction in life that and by the time they've gotten to my age, they're too cynical to believe in that anymore or something like that. I don't know really. Um,
Yeah, I would agree with that.
so so that makes me think like in a in a way, like if these younger people were like more cynical and less idealistic, they might be less susceptible to it. But on the other hand, if the opposite were true, they might also be less susceptible to it, right? Like if they had more to hope for in their everyday life, then I don't know. They so it seems like yeah, I don't know. What do you think we can do about this culturally to kind of make it so that that people can integrate with their communities in a way that'll leave them less alienated? Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I think it would just go back to my earlier prescriptions, like building more community centers, investing in more opportunities for people to do things, to get work, actual gainful employment, not just working at Walmart for like. Well, actually, they pay pretty decent if you live in a federal minimum wage. But yeah, like people working at McDonald's, like give them better opportunities, or make sure they're getting paid like a decent wage. Things that just provide people more opportunities to, do the things that they may lack the money to do, and allocate more land for community gardening, allocate more land for community centers to be built. Basically, give people the opportunity to mingle with their community.
Mm-hmm. Um, it, I wonder, even given those opportunities, I wonder if a lot of people might not take those opportunities, right? Because so this is going to kind of go back to one of the first things we were talking about with where we've got an entire online economy that's all meant to grab your attention and keep your eyeballs on the screen all day long, right? And so this entire exercise of trying to get people integrated physically into their communities has to compete against that as well.
Yeah, that's a really really tough one because like I lean towards like government regulation of social media companies and their use of algorithms, but there could be major problems coming around with that. So it's very difficult to actually come up with a solution that wouldn't lend itself to bad uses later.
Um, so let's see. Another thing I wanted to try to connect this to was the changing gender roles over the last several decades, and like particularly the way that this has affected men. I think because it seemed to me like a couple generations ago, men would derive a lot of their personal identity and the value that they perceive to have in their community is going to be very tied up to their professional life. Like they would just identify themselves as like I am a lawyer, I am a painter, I am whatever type of person, and this was like very central to their identities, right? And it seems like that has become less and less true, especially for men. I think it might have actually become more true for women than it once was, but for men it seems like a lot less. Um, so I don't know. I mean that makes me wonder. Well, I don't know. How do you think that interfaces with a lot of the stuff that you were saying about trying to provide people with gainful employment to find more purpose in life? Like, if that isn't the kind of purpose that they're looking for, or if that isn't the kind of like identity that they're aiming for, I don't know.
Well, I would say it connects very heavily because, at least in all the research I've ever seen, unemployment is a very big cause of things like major depressive disorder, things like suicide, things like. It's also an indicator that somebody may join an extremist group, at least from what I remember. It basically opens you up to the feelings of like hopelessness, uh, just general despair, and it makes you a lot more vulnerable to external stressors and external triggers. So you're a lot more open to joining a group that may give you something to believe in, may give you a bit of hope. You're open to ideas of suicide. You're open to a lot of other terrible things that can occur, like getting mental illness and all.
Yeah, so if we've got lower labor force participation, we've got lower church attendance, like just a lot of these things that people were deriving their sense of identity from in the past, then it makes sense that there's going to be a tremendous sense of loss for people who are either losing those things over the course of their lifetime, or who are growing up without them in a cultural background where they're kind of raised to value those things, but then those things aren't actually uh, giving them the kind of value that they want. Um,
Uh, yeah, I would disagree with that. I don't think that's the. I think that is an issue, but I don't think it's the major issue. I think a lot of people are just like ending up staying at home, not feeling like participating in the labor force. And I think there's also a lot of people who are missing out on opportunities to join the labor force or to actually like hold maybe a higher position that may give them more gainful. But one thing I have heard before is that unemployment is associated with a major increase in the death rate. Have you ever heard?
so I'm sorry, your audio cut out for a second. Unemployment is associated with an increase in what was that?
Death death rate, mortality?
Oh, okay. I'm not sure if I've heard that exact thing, but it's not surprising, you know. Um, so I guess maybe maybe like just your life expectancy is shortened if you're unemployed. Is that kind of what you mean by that? I'm trying to imagine what type of statistic you would have to verify that, or like more deaths by suicide or.
I'm looking at a study here. I'm trying to find specifically what it says, but I think a lot of the deaths are associated with drug use, like alcohol addiction, depression that leads to suicide, stress that can cause like heart attacks or stroke. Because just like working a lot, not working at all, that increases the amount of stress you're at least from like potential economic anxiety from not being able to pay your bills, not being able to get enough to eat, or just feeling worthless all the time.
You mentioned drug use, and I know that's something that you have a big interest in talking about a lot. And do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I think drug use specifically is heavily associated with at least the things associated with poverty. I haven't been able to find a study that says poverty is correlated with drug use. Just that literally everything that makes up the word poverty is correlated with drug use, like unemployment, violence in the household, all the different like ACEs somebody may get, the adverse childhood experiences. Those are generally higher in more impoverished homes, not having a father in the household, or or just having a father and not a mother. All these things are heavily associated with drug use, and drug use is also associated with suicide and increase in mental health disorders. So all of these things kind of feed into each other to make impoverished communities a lot more susceptible to increased mortality rates, extremist groups, violence, basically all the things that keep these communities down in the first.
And I think you're in favor of drug legalization. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that for all drugs or only some? Or
I would say all drugs, although I might make the exception for methamphetamine because methamphetamine is one of the only drugs that I've ever looked into that was directly neurotoxic.
okay. So what? Why is it that you favor legalization?
I think legalization would be more important because it essentially gives you an opportunity to have an actual government agency regulating like what is in this heroin someone's buying, how much of it is actually heroin. That way, we avoid things like overdoses because a lot of overdoses stem from the fact that people will get used to using say you got a bag of 10% heroin and then some other kind of powder mixed in. That person will get used to doing their regular dose, and then something else will come into town, and it's going to be 40 or 50% heroin. And suddenly, when they use their regular dose, they overdose because the amount of heroin that kills you is 4 to 5 times the recreational dose. And then you also have adulterants like fentanyl, which I think is 50 times stronger than heroin, and carfentanil, which I think is 100 times stronger than heroin. Those things often get stuck into the drug supply, and that also causes a lot of overdose deaths because the people who are adding those into the drug supply are often like not necessarily low level dealers, but medium level dealers who don't really know how to mix drugs into it. So they mix it poorly, and then somebody ends up getting a chunk of carfentanil in their bag, and they end up dying because they snort like that much.
So you've got a bunch of safety concerns about drugs that would be improved by legalization, and then I've also heard you mention before that that it would help disrupt the kind of cycle of poverty or something like that. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I believe that by legalizing drugs, it allows people to not only survive their drug addictions, but it also removes the criminal element from communities. When you don't have like street level dealers fighting over territory, you have less violent crime occurring. And when you have a legal source, uh, depending on the tax rate you actually apply to it, you can often get it at if you don't like heavily tax it, you get it to a point where it costs less in general than what the street level value would be. And if that occurs, then you would also have less people committing petty thefts like stealing from other people or ripping the copper wiring out of property, stuff like that. And you also get and when you reduce violence, when you reduce theft, when you reduce property damage, all of these things are things that lead directly to poverty. So the crime rate can increase the level of poverty in your neighborhood because it reduces property value. Uh, Obviously, damage to property reduces property value, and then oh god, what was the other thing? I kind of lost my train of thought there, but I think a lot of these things. Oh, violence. Yeah, that also reduces the property value and also makes it more likely that people have some sort of trauma effect. So that and if you get rid of those factors or at least reduce them, you also have you will end up with a cycle that leads to less of that over time, and that slowly reduces its.
Okay, and then I think you draw a distinction between legalization versus decriminalization. Would you explain like what that distinction is?
Yeah, decriminalization just means that petty level users who possess a certain amount of a substance won't be going to prison for it. They're still open to fines or other things like I think in Portugal they still fine people like half a month's pay, and then they put them before like a tribunal for to decide whether they're going to have to go to a drug rehabilitation program or whether they'll just have to have like a state supervision. Personally, I don't like that idea because I don't think a person can really get clean by getting forced to get clean. I think they have to at least want to stop using before they actually, you know, have the opportunity to do so and actually will do.
So yeah, Portugal seems to be the go-to example for people that want to argue for drug decriminalization. Um, are there any examples of countries that have gone as far with legalization as you would want to go?
I do not believe so. I think Portugal is the most lax on drugs out of any other country.
Okay. Let's see. Are you worried that more people would start using drugs if it were legal? Like, do you think the outlawing drug use has any effect on deterring people from using?
I think following what at least happened in Portugal, I think in the year after legalizing, well, they decriminalized. In the year after, you would likely have a higher lifetime use rate. So essentially, somebody went out and they were like, "Oh, drugs are legal. I'll try a little bit of cocaine." Uh, so you'll have a higher use rate over the lifetime, like the year after, but then that'll reduce following that to levels that are below what had originally occurred. Because I think if you were to make them legal, I think pretty much only the types of people who are already inclined to drug use would do drugs. And you also see this with prohibition in the 20s. It was the 20s.
Yeah, I want to say it was like originally in the 20s and then up through the 30s or something like that. I can't remember the timeline. Um,
I want to say that alcohol use rates increased during Prohibition, but now that I'm saying it, I don't know if it's true. I'm gonna look that
I've
up.
heard that before as well, but I also don't know for sure whether it's true. Would okay, so if it were true that that legalizing drugs would increase the number of people using them, would you still be in favor?
I'd say it would entirely depend on more so the amount of people who were dying, because I think that's the more important factor. Like if we have, say, like a 1 or 2% increase in the amount of people using drugs, but we have less people dying, uh, I'd say that's probably a better scenario. But I would have to think more deeply on that specific.
Yeah,
And then
okay.
also to the earlier point where I was talking about communities, I also think one of the important factors is making sure that people who do have an addiction to drugs also have an opportunity to get gainful employment. So destigmatizing the use of drugs would likely lead to less usage of like drug tests on people.
Okay. Um, so I got one more thing I want to ask you about, which is it looks like you've got a little keyboard there in your background. Are you a musician?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a musician. I'd call myself more of a hobbyist. I'm not very good at playing the piano, but I like to play the piano.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I do audio engineering, but do you like do you write your own music or anything like that, or do you just play occasionally, or what do you do?
Yeah, occasionally, I'll try and write something. I enjoy like writing lyrics, and but for like just playing on the piano, I usually just use mainly chords because I'm not very good at hitting the individual keys and making it sound.
That might be a fun thing for you to do on stream sometime. To do like a little music stream.
Yeah, potentially. Although I would definitely want to practice. a little more consistently before I did that to my, I think, one viewer, and that's probably me.
um, okay. And I think you said that what you're hoping to do with your stream is like play games and have political arguments or whatever. So we've been talking a whole lot about what your political positions are, but I don't think I've asked you like what kind of games do you like to play?
Oh, I don't know. My gameplay kind of falls in line with my music consumption. I like a bunch of different games, like from FPSs to. I was going to say MOBAs, but then I realized that every time I play League of Legends, I hate every second. Uh, yeah, I play a bunch of different games. Like if you've ever have you ever heard of Project Zomb?
No. What kind of game is that?
Do you know what an isometric game?
Like Diablo? Is that kind of what it's like?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
So basically, it's a zombie game that's isometric, top-down, 2D graphics. Well, actually, it's in 3D graphics since it was made in Unity,
Hmm.
and so you essentially go from house to house looking for. And then, yeah, I play some of those grand strategy games. Like I play games from pretty much every genre, but mainly right now, I've just been playing a lot of Apex Legends.
Okay. I've played some Grand Strategy. I used to play a lot of Civilization 4, Civilization 5, and I play like Europa Universalis 4 once in a while. But yeah, what Grand Strategy games do you like?
Stellaris, Civilization 5. I got Civilization 6 free from Epic, and then I opened it and I was like, wow, that's a lot more options. And then I immediately closed. What else have I played? Uh, I'm sure I played more grand strategy games than that, but I played Hearts of Iron 3 once, but
Revered Simp is
that's
asking about Crusader Kings. Do you ever play that?
I tried it out once, but I was not very good and almost immediately gave.
All right. Well, I don't know. You got anything you want to ask me before we're done?
Oh, not that I can think of.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me. This is the Myopic Times, and he's just the Myopic Times on Twitch and Discord, and he's got a website, myopictimes.com, and I'm gonna send you all over to him in a raid momentarily. So thanks for doing this interview with me, and good luck.
Yep, thanks for
Mhm.